My name is Felix Rourde, and I fix things for a living. Broken pipes, cracked foundations, rotting deck boards, you name it, I can make it right again. What I couldn't fix was my marriage, though I didn't know it was broken until that Sunday morning when my wife invited me to brunch with her squad. Cambria never invited me anywhere with her friends. In 15 years of marriage, I'd been the invisible husband, the guy who paid for their wine nights and vacation trips while staying home to work on our colonial house in Millbrook, Maine. So when she waltzed into our kitchen wearing her designer athleisure outfit and announced I was joining them at Meridian Café, every alarm bell in my contractor's brain started ringing. "You want me to come to brunch?" I asked, setting down my coffee mug on the granite countertop I'd installed myself. "With Mira and the others?" That's what I said. Cambria's smile was too bright, like fresh paint over primer. "We're all bringing our husbands today. It'll be fun." Fun. Right. About as fun as discovering termites in your load-bearing beams. I knew Cambria's squad well enough to recognize a setup. Mira Callan, the influencer who filmed everything for her lifestyle brand. Rory Veldon, the failed novelist who treated other people's drama like research material. And Jessa Roven, the supposed voice of reason who always seemed to know everyone's business before they did. These women didn't do anything without a purpose, and they sure didn't include husbands unless they needed witnesses. "All right," I said, grabbing my keys. "Let's go see what this is really about." The drive to Meridian took 20 minutes through Millbrook's tree-lined streets. Cambria spent the entire trip checking her reflection in the passenger mirror and texting furiously. I caught glimpses of her screen, group chat messages flying back and forth with her friends. "Everything okay?" I asked as we pulled into the cafe parking lot. "Perfect," she said, but her voice had that tight quality it got when she was nervous about a big presentation at work. Cambria was senior marketing director at Pinnacle Solutions, a tech consulting firm downtown. She'd climbed her way up from entry-level coordinator to corner office in 8 years, and she wore her ambition like expensive perfume, subtle but unmistakable. Meridian Café was packed with the usual Sunday crowd, young families with strollers, college students hunched over laptops, and tables full of women like Cambria's squad, perfectly put together and loud enough to be heard 3 tables away. I spotted them immediately. Mira had her phone propped up against a mimosa pitcher, recording herself as she gestured dramatically. Rory was taking notes in a leather journal, because of course she was. Jessa kept glancing toward the entrance like she was expecting someone important. Their husbands sat beside them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. I knew the feeling. "Felix!" Mira called out as we approached, her voice carrying that artificial enthusiasm she used for her videos. "So glad you could make it." I slid into the empty chair next to Cambria, nodding at the other men. Tom worked in insurance, quiet guy who mostly kept his head down. Brad owned a small accounting firm and always looked like he was calculating something. Steve taught high school history and had the tired expression of someone who'd spent too many years dealing with teenagers. "This is nice," I said, meaning the opposite. "What's the occasion?" The women exchanged glances. Mira's phone was definitely recording now, though she tried to make it look casual. Cambria reached for her mimosa and took a long sip. Well, since everyone's here, I guess there's no point in waiting. My gut clenched. Here it comes. "Felix," she said, turning to face me with that same too bright smile. "I want out." The table went quiet except for the soft hum of Mira's phone camera. I could feel the other wives leaning forward, hungry for my reaction. The husbands looked uncomfortable, like they were witnessing something they shouldn't. I took a sip of my coffee and set the mug down carefully. "Out of what, exactly?" "Our marriage." Cambria's voice was steady now, confident. She'd practiced this. "I'm not happy, Felix. I haven't been for a long time." "Interesting timing," I said, keeping my voice level. "Right here, right now, with all your friends recording." Mira's cheeks flushed, but she didn't stop filming. Rory was scribbling furiously in her journal. Jessa watched me with calculating eyes, waiting to see how I'd react. I wanted our friends here for support, Cambria said. This isn't easy for me. No, I bet it's not. I pulled out my phone and opened the Photos app. Especially since you've been practicing this conversation with your boss for the past 3 months. The color drained from Cambria's face. What are you talking about? I turned my phone screen toward the table, showing a screenshot of text messages. Cambria's name at the top, followed by a string of messages to someone named Wilder. Can't wait to be free of him, I read aloud. Felix is so boring. Just a contractor who thinks he's smart. You make me feel alive again. Cambria lunged for my phone, but I pulled it back. The other wives were staring, their excitement turning to shock. Mira's phone was still recording, capturing every second. There's more, I continued, swiping to the next screenshot. Hotel receipts from the Grandview downtown. Same dates you told me you were working late on the Morrison account. Felix, stop, Cambria hissed, but I was just getting started. And my personal favorite, I said, showing another message thread. The one where you and your squad here planned this whole scene. The loyalty test, you called it. See how the husbands react when confronted publicly. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Jessa's mouth fell open. Rory stopped writing. Mira's phone slipped in her hand, but she kept recording. I stood up and tossed a 20 on the table. Well, here's your reaction. You want out? You got it. But next time you plan to humiliate someone, maybe don't leave your laptop open in the kitchen. I started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Cambria? Your boss's wife might be interested in these screenshots. I'll make sure she gets copies. The last thing I heard as I left the cafe was Cambria's voice, high and panicked, calling my name. But I was already pushing through the door into the cool Maine morning, feeling lighter than I had in months. The drive home gave me time to think. Cambria would be furious, probably calling Wilder right now to figure out damage control. Her friends would be in chaos, wondering what other evidence I had. And somewhere in that mess, they'd all be realizing that the quiet contractor they'd underestimated had just turned their loyalty test inside out. I pulled into our driveway and sat in the truck for a moment, looking at the house I'd spent 15 years improving. New roof, updated electrical, refinished hardwood floors, custom kitchen cabinets. I'd put my heart into this place, just like I'd put my heart into our marriage. But unlike the house, some things couldn't be fixed with the right tools and enough patience. My phone buzzed with a text from Brett, my best friend since high school. He was an ex-Marine who'd started his own private investigation business after getting out of the service. Heard through the grapevine something went down at brunch. You okay? I typed back. Better than okay. Want to grab a drink later? I might need some professional advice. Sable Fox at 7. I'll bring the good stuff. The Sable Fox was our usual spot, a local bar where everyone knew your name and your business. Barb, the owner and bartender, had been serving drinks and collecting gossip for 20 years. If you wanted to know what was happening in Millbrook, you bought Barb a coffee and listened. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my basement workshop, organizing tools and thinking through my next moves. Cambria would come home eventually, probably with a strategy her friends had helped her devise. But I had advantages they didn't know about. Being underestimated was actually useful when people assumed you were too simple to pay attention. Cambria came home at 6:30, her face puffy from crying. She found me in the kitchen, heating up leftover pizza and reading a home improvement magazine like nothing had happened. We need to talk, she said, dropping her purse on the counter with more force than necessary. Sure. I didn't look up from the article about deck staining. How was the rest of brunch? Get some good footage for Mira's channel? This isn't a joke, Felix. You humiliated me in front of my friends. Now I looked up. Funny, I thought that was the plan. Except I was supposed to be the one getting humiliated. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. We both knew I was right. Those messages, she said finally, they're not what you think. Really? Because they seemed pretty clear to me. You've been having an affair with your boss and planning to leave me in the most public way possible. Wilder and I, it's complicated. Is it? I closed the magazine and gave her my full attention. Because it looks simple from here. You wanted out of our marriage, but needed a reason that made you look like the victim. So you and your friends cooked up this loyalty test nonsense, figuring I'd either grovel or explode, and either way you'd get your dramatic exit. Cambria's eyes filled with tears, but I'd seen her cry on command during arguments before. It was one of her favorite tactics. I never meant for it to happen, she said. Wilder and I started working closely together on the Patterson deal, and things just developed. For 3 months? How long have you known? Long enough. I took a bite of pizza. You're not as subtle as you think, Cambria. Late nights that didn't line up with your schedule, new wardrobe pieces that never came home, and then you started locking down all your devices, which made it obvious. She slumped into the chair across from me. So what happens now? Now you get what you wanted. I'll file for divorce tomorrow. Felix, wait. Maybe we can work this out. Counseling or... No. I stood up and rinsed my plate in the sink. You made your choice when you decided to turn our marriage into entertainment for your friends. I'm going out. Don't wait up. The Sable Fox was busier than usual for a Sunday night. Football on the big screen, locals arguing about the Patriots' chances this season, and Barb holding court behind the bar with her usual mix of wisdom and gossip. Brett was already there when I arrived, sitting in our regular booth with 2 beers and a bottle of something stronger. He looked up as I approached, taking in my expression. That bad, huh? Worse. I slid into the booth and grabbed one of the beers. She's been planning this for months, her and that squad of hers. The influencer crew? I never liked them. Smart man. I filled him in on the brunch ambush and the evidence I'd found. Brett listened without interrupting, his investigator instincts cataloging every detail. So, what's your play? He asked when I finished. That's what I need to figure out. She wants a divorce, fine, but I'm not going to let her and her friends destroy my reputation in the process. Barb appeared at our table with fresh drinks and her knowing smile. Heard there was some excitement at Meridian this morning. News travels fast, I said. Honey, in this town, news travels at light speed. Mira posted about it on her social media. Something about supporting friends through difficult transitions. Barb's expression turned sour. Made it sound like you were the problem. Brett and I exchanged glances. What exactly did she say? Oh, the usual nonsense. How sometimes people show their true colors under pressure. How important it is to have strong female friendships. She didn't mention names, but everyone knows who she was talking about. My jaw tightened. They weren't content with humiliating me at brunch. Now they were spinning the story to make me look like the villain. There's more, Barb continued, lowering her voice. Jessa was in here an hour ago, talking to anyone who'd listen about how controlling you are. How Cambria's been afraid to leave because she didn't know how you'd react. Afraid? I almost laughed. Cambria's never been afraid of anything in her life. I know that, and you know that. But people love drama, especially when it comes wrapped up in a pretty package. Barb patted my shoulder. Don't you worry, though. Some of us remember when you helped rebuild the community center after the storm, and when you fixed Mrs. Patterson's roof for free after her husband passed. Thanks, Barb. After she left, Brett leaned forward. They're trying to control the narrative. Get ahead of the story before you can tell your side. So what do? Fight back, but smart. He pulled out his phone and opened a notes app. Tell me everything you know about this Wilder guy. I thought about what I'd learned from Cambria's messages and her occasional mentions of her boss. Wilder Sornell, CEO of Pinnacle Solutions. Mid-40s, divorced, lives in one of those glass penthouse apartments downtown, drives a Tesla, works out at that expensive gym on Harbor Street. Kids? 2, but they live with his ex-wife in Boston. He sees them every other weekend, according to Cambria. Brett made notes. What about his reputation at work? Cambria always said he was demanding but fair, pushed people hard but got results. I paused, remembering something. Although she mentioned once that he'd gone through 3 assistants in 2 years, and there was some comment about HR having to talk to him about workplace boundaries. Interesting. Brett looked up from his phone. Sounds like your wife might not be his first office romance. You think he makes a habit of this? Powerful guy, corner office, pattern of inappropriate behavior with female employees? It's possible. Brett finished his drink. Give me a couple days to dig around. I've got contacts at some of the other firms downtown. If Wilder's done this before, someone will know about it. We talked strategy for another hour. Brett would investigate Wilder's background while I focused on protecting my own reputation and gathering more evidence of the affair. The key was staying ahead of whatever story Cambria and her friends were trying to build. One more thing, Brett said as we prepared to leave. You need to be careful. If they're willing to set you up once, they'll try it again. Don't give them any ammunition. I drove home through Millbrook's quiet streets, past the houses I'd worked on over the years. The Morrison place where I'd installed a new deck last summer. The Chen family's Victorian where I'd rewired the entire second floor. The community center where I'd volunteered every weekend for a month after the storm damage. This was my town, my reputation they were trying to destroy, and I wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. Cambria's car was in the driveway when I got home, but the house was dark except for the porch light. I found a note on the kitchen counter written in her precise handwriting. Gone to stay with Mira for a few days. We both need space to think. Please don't contact me unless it's an emergency. I crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. Space to think or space to plan their next move. Either way, it gave me time to prepare for whatever came next. The next morning brought an email from a lawyer I'd never heard of, informing me that Cambria had retained legal counsel and requesting that all communication go through their office. I wasn't surprised, but the speed of it confirmed what I already suspected. This had been planned well in advance. I called my own lawyer, Jim Morrison, who'd handled the legal work when I started my contracting business. He was a straight shooter who'd grown up in Millbrook and understood how things worked in small towns. Felix, good to hear from you, Jim said when his secretary put me through. Though I'm guessing this isn't a social call. Afraid not. Cambria filed for divorce yesterday, and she's already got representation. I need someone in my corner. Of course. Can you come in this afternoon? We'll need to go through everything, assets, debts, potential complications. There's one big complication. She's been having an affair with her boss, and I've got evidence. Jim was quiet for a moment. How solid is this evidence? Text messages, hotel receipts, photos, and her friends know about it. Good. Maine's a no-fault divorce state, but adultery can still impact things like spousal support and asset division. Bring everything you have. After scheduling the appointment, I spent the morning going through Cambria's laptop more thoroughly. She'd been careless with her digital security, probably assuming I was too technologically challenged to figure out her passwords. But 15 years of marriage meant I knew her patterns. Birthdays, anniversary dates, the name of her childhood dog. What I found was worse than I'd initially thought. The affair with Wilder had started 4 months ago, not 3. There were dozens of explicit messages, plans for weekend getaways, and discussions about their future together. But the most damning evidence was a conversation between Cambria and her squad about how to handle the Felix problem. Mira had suggested the public confrontation, arguing that it would make good content for her social media platforms. Rory wanted to document everything for a potential book about modern divorce. Jessa had researched divorce laws and suggested ways to maximize Cambria's financial settlement. They'd turned my marriage into a group project. My phone rang while I was printing screenshots. Brett's name appeared on the screen. "Got some interesting information about your wife's boyfriend," he said without preamble. That was fast. "I know people. Wilder Sornell has a reputation, and it's not good. 3 harassment complaints filed with HR in the past 5 years. 2 settlements paid out to former employees. And rumor has it, he's currently under investigation for creating a hostile work environment." I felt a grim satisfaction. So Cambria picked a real winner. Gets better. His company's in the middle of a merger with a larger firm. If this affair becomes public, especially with the harassment history, it could tank the deal. We're talking millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs. Meaning he's got a lot to lose. Exactly, which makes him dangerous, but also vulnerable. Brett paused. "There's something else. I talked to a bartender at the Grandview Hotel. She remembers Cambria and Wilder because they were regulars. Always paid cash, always requested the same room, always acted like they owned the place. Arrogant. Stupid, more like it. The bartender took pictures of them together because she thought they were celebrities at first. Wilder was throwing money around, talking loud about his business deals. Can you get copies of those photos?" "Already did. I'll email them to you." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the evidence I'd accumulated. Screenshots, photos, financial records, witness statements. It was enough to destroy both Cambria and Wilder professionally and personally. The question was how to use it. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Wilder Sornell. We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "About what?" "About making this situation work for everyone involved. Can you meet me at my office this afternoon?" "I'll pass. If you want to talk, we do it in public." "Fine. Meridian Café, 3 p.m. Come alone." I almost laughed. He wanted to meet at the same place where his girlfriend had tried to humiliate me yesterday. The irony was perfect, but I wasn't stupid enough to go alone. I called Brett and filled him in. "Can you be there? Not at the same table, but close enough to intervene if things go sideways." "Already planning on it. And Felix, record everything. If he tries to threaten or bribe you, we want it documented." I spent the rest of the morning preparing for the meeting. I printed out the most damaging evidence and put it in a folder, along with copies of Brett's photos from the hotel. If Wilder wanted to negotiate, he needed to understand exactly what I was holding. The appointment with Jim Morrison went smoothly. He reviewed the evidence with professional detachment, occasionally raising an eyebrow at particularly damning messages. "This is comprehensive," he said finally. "Your wife's attorney is going to have a difficult time painting you as the villain with evidence like this. What about the affair? Can we use it to contest whatever settlement she's asking for?" "Absolutely. Adultery may not be grounds for divorce in Maine, but it's definitely relevant to spousal support and asset division, especially if we can prove she spent marital assets on the affair. Hotel rooms, gifts, expensive dinners, it's all documented." "Perfect. I'll start drafting our response to her filing. In the meantime, be careful. Desperate people do desperate things, and if this Wilder character has as much to lose as you think, he might try something foolish." At 2:30, I drove to Meridian Café. The lunch crowd was thinning out, leaving mostly students and remote workers scattered around tables with laptops. I chose a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance and waited. Brett arrived first, settling at the counter with a newspaper and coffee. He nodded slightly when he saw me, then went back to reading. Wilder showed up at exactly 3 o'clock. He was taller than I'd expected, maybe 6'3", with the kind of expensive haircut and tailored clothes that screamed corporate success. But there was something desperate in his eyes as he scanned the cafe, looking for me. I raised my hand slightly, and he walked over with the confident stride of someone used to being the most important person in any room. "Felix, He slid into the booth across from me without being invited. Thanks for meeting me. Didn't have much choice, did I? You've been screwing my wife for 4 months? His face flushed, but he kept his voice level. That's complicated. No, it's really not. You're her boss, she's your employee, and you're both cheating on your spouses. My divorce was finalized 2 years ago. Congratulations. Still doesn't make this right. Wilder leaned forward, lowering his voice. Look, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But destroying Cambria's career isn't going to fix your marriage. Who said anything about destroying her career? Come on. We both know what happens if this becomes public. Cambria loses her job, I lose mine, and a lot of innocent people get hurt in the process. I opened the folder and slid one of the hotel photos across the table. Wilder's face went pale as he recognized himself and Cambria in an intimate embrace at the Grandview bar. Looks like it already is public, I said. Question is, how public do you want it to get? What do you want? I want my wife to stop lying about me to her friends and anyone else who will listen. I want her to admit she's the one who cheated, not me. And I want you to stay away from my family. That's reasonable. I'm not finished. I slid another photo across the table, this one showing Wilder's hand on Cambria's thigh while she laughed at something he'd said. I also want you to think about what happens to your merger when your board finds out about your history with female employees. Wilder's jaw tightened. You don't know anything about my business. I know enough. 3 harassment complaints, 2 settlements, and an ongoing investigation. Add a public affair with a married subordinate, and I'm guessing your corporate partners might have second thoughts. You're threatening me. I'm educating you. There's a difference. We stared at each other across the table. Wilder was used to intimidating people, but he was out of his element here. This wasn't a boardroom where he could use his position and wealth to get what he wanted. What's it going to take? He asked finally. For you to disappear from our lives completely. Transfer Cambria to another department, or better yet, another company. End the affair and make sure she understands that any more lies about me will have consequences. And if I do that? Then maybe the photos stay private. Maybe your board never finds out about your pattern of inappropriate behavior. Maybe you get to keep your corner office and your merger. Wilder stood up abruptly. I need time to think about this. You've got 24 hours. After that, I start making phone calls. He walked away without another word, his confident stride replaced by the hurried pace of someone who'd just realized how much trouble he was in. Brett waited until Wilder was gone before joining me at the booth. Well, that was interesting, he said. Think he'll play ball? He doesn't have much choice, but you're right about desperate people doing desperate things. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. I should have known Wilder wouldn't go quietly. The next morning, I woke up to find my truck's tires slashed and "Liar" spray-painted across the garage door. It was amateur hour vandalism, the kind of thing a desperate man does when he's running out of options. But it told me everything I needed to know about Wilder's character. I called the police first, then Brett, then took pictures of everything before starting the cleanup. Officer Martinez, who'd responded to the vandalism report, was thorough but realistic about the chances of finding the culprit. No cameras, no witnesses, could have been anyone, she said, filling out her report. But given your current situation, I'd recommend installing some security measures. Already planning on it. Brett arrived as Martinez was leaving. He walked around the truck, examining the damage with professional interest. Clean cuts, probably a utility knife, he said. Your boy Wilder strikes me as the type who'd have expensive tools. Think he did it himself? Doubt it. More likely he hired some kid to do his dirty work. Gives him plausible deniability if anyone asks. I spent the morning dealing with insurance companies and tire shops while Brett installed a basic security system around the house. Motion-activated cameras, floodlights, and door sensors that would alert my phone if anyone came near the property. Overkill for vandalism. Brett said as he mounted the last camera. "But if things escalate, you'll want documentation." My phone rang while we were testing the system. Jim Morrison's name appeared on the screen. "Felix, we've got a problem," he said without preamble. "Cambria's attorney filed an emergency motion claiming you're harassing and threatening her client. They want a restraining order." "Based on what?" "They claim you've been stalking her, making threatening phone calls, and intimidating her friends. They're painting you as an unstable individual who might become violent." I felt my temper spike. "That's complete nonsense. I haven't contacted her since Sunday." "I know that, and we'll fight it. But we need to be prepared for a hearing this afternoon. Can you get down here by 2? After hanging up, I filled Brett in on the latest development. "Classic move," he said. "They're trying to flip the script, make you look like the aggressor. If they can get a restraining order, it strengthens their position in the divorce proceedings." "Can they do that? Just lie to a judge?" "They can try, but we've got evidence of their actual behavior, including yesterday's meeting with Wilder, plus the vandalism report from this morning." The hearing was held in a cramped courtroom that smelled like old coffee and disappointment. Cambria sat with her attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Vance, who'd clearly come prepared for battle. Cambria looked smaller than usual, wearing a conservative dress and minimal makeup. She'd styled herself to look vulnerable, the innocent victim of an aggressive husband. It was a good performance. Judge Harrison was a gray-haired man in his 60s who'd been handling family court cases for decades. He listened patiently as Vance laid out their case, painting me as an increasingly unstable individual who'd become obsessed with punishing his wife for wanting a divorce. "Your Honor," Vance said, consulting her notes, "Mr. Rourde has engaged in a pattern of harassment that's escalating in severity. He's been following my client, photographing her without consent, and making threats against her and her colleagues." "What kind of threats?" Judge Harrison asked. "He's threatened to destroy her career and reputation. He's contacted her employer with false allegations. And yesterday, he arranged a meeting with her supervisor where he made explicit threats about releasing private information." I watched Cambria as her attorney spoke. She kept her eyes down, playing the part perfectly. But I could see the calculation behind her performance. When it was Jim's turn to respond, he stood with the folder of evidence we'd prepared. "Your Honor, Mr. Rourde is not the aggressor here. He's the victim of an elaborate scheme designed to humiliate him publicly and destroy his reputation." Jim opened the folder and pulled out the printed screenshots. "We have extensive evidence that Mrs. Rourde has been conducting an extramarital affair for 4 months, and that she and her friends planned the confrontation that led to this proceeding." Judge Harrison accepted the documents and reviewed them silently. I watched his expression change as he read through the messages. "These appear to be text conversations between Mrs. Rourde and a third party," he said finally. "Her supervisor, Wilder Sornell," Jim confirmed. "The same man she claims Mr. Rourde threatened yesterday. We also have evidence that Mr. Rourde's property was vandalized last night, presumably in retaliation for that meeting." Vance stood up quickly. "Your Honor, we dispute the authenticity of those documents. They could easily have been fabricated." "They came from Mrs. Rourde's own laptop," Jim replied, "which she left in the marital home when she moved out. Mr. Rourde was well within his rights to access a shared computer." Judge Harrison studied the evidence for several more minutes while the courtroom remained silent. Finally, he looked up. "Mrs. Vance, while I understand your client's concerns, the evidence presented suggests a more complex situation than your motion indicates. I'm not prepared to issue a restraining order based on the current record." Cambria's face went pale. Vance shuffled through her papers, clearly not expecting this outcome. "However," the judge continued, "I'm ordering both parties to maintain a reasonable distance from each other while the divorce proceedings continue. No contact except through attorneys, and no interference with each other's employment or personal relationships." It wasn't everything I'd hoped for, but it was better than a restraining order. More importantly, it meant their strategy had failed. Outside the courthouse, Jim and I debriefed on the steps. That went better than expected, he said. The evidence you provided made all the difference. What happens now? Now we wait for their next move. But they're running out of legal options, which means they might try something else. That evening, I met Brett at the Sable Fox to celebrate the small victory. Barb had heard about the court hearing through the local gossip network and had opinions about the whole situation. That Cambria always thought she was better than everyone else, she said, polishing glasses with more force than necessary. Walking around town like she was some kind of celebrity. And don't get me started on that squad of hers. Speaking of which, Brett said, I've been keeping tabs on their social media. Mira's been posting a lot about supporting friends through difficult times, but she's being careful not to mention names. Smart. After what happened in court today, they're probably worried about legal exposure. There's something else. Jessa came in here yesterday asking questions about you. Wanted to know about your finances, your business, whether you'd ever been in trouble with the law. I looked up from my beer. What did you tell her? The truth. That you're one of the most honest people in town, and anyone who says otherwise is lying. Barb's expression softened. But it tells you what they're thinking. They're looking for ammunition. Brett nodded. We need to stay ahead of them. Keep documenting everything, and be prepared for whatever they try next. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. You made a mistake today. This isn't over. I showed the message to Brett, who immediately pulled out his own phone. I'm calling this in to Officer Martinez. Threatening messages after a court hearing? That's not smart. While Brett made the call, I stared at my phone screen. The number wasn't one I recognized, but the tone sounded like Wilder. Arrogant, threatening, and stupid enough to put it in writing. Martinez is going to patrol your street tonight, Brett said after hanging up, and she wants copies of any other messages you receive. We finished our drinks and headed home through Millbrook's quiet streets. The town looked peaceful in the evening light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before the storm. Cambria and Wilder had tried legal intimidation and failed. They'd tried vandalism and gotten caught. Now they were making direct threats, which meant they were getting desperate. And desperate people, as Brett had warned me, do desperate things. The attack came 3 days later, but not the way I expected. I was having lunch at Murphy's Deli when Tom Bradley, one of my regular clients, approached my table with an uncomfortable expression. Felix, I hate to bring this up, but I got a call this morning about the work you did on my kitchen last year. I set down my sandwich. What kind of call? Someone claiming to be from the state licensing board. Said there were complaints about your work, questions about whether you were properly certified. Tom looked embarrassed. I told them the work was perfect, but they said they needed to inspect it anyway. My stomach dropped. Tom, I've been licensed for 15 years. My certifications are all current. I figured it was nonsense, but I thought you should know. After Tom left, I called the state licensing board directly. The woman who answered confirmed what I already suspected. No complaints had been filed, no inspections were scheduled, and my licenses were all in good standing. Someone was making false reports, trying to damage my business reputation. I called Brett immediately. They're escalating, he said after I explained what had happened. Going after your livelihood now. Can we trace the calls? I'll try, but if they're smart, they're using burner phones or spoofed numbers. Brett paused. How many clients have you heard from? Just Tom so far, but if they're making multiple calls... My phone rang before I could finish the sentence. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow whose roof I'd repaired after her husband passed away. Felix, dear, I got the strangest call this morning. Someone asking about the work you did on my house, whether I was satisfied with it. I told them you were wonderful, but they kept asking questions about permits and inspections. I reassured Mrs. Patterson and promised to look into it, but my hands were shaking as I hung up. They weren't just attacking me, they were dragging innocent people into their scheme. That crossed a line. I drove straight to Brett's office, a converted warehouse space downtown where he ran his investigation business. He was already pulling up phone records on his computer when I arrived. "I've got 3 more calls to your clients in the past hour," he said without looking up. "All claiming to be from various regulatory agencies, all asking questions designed to make people worry about the quality of your work. This is Wilder's doing. It has to be. Probably. But we need proof, and we need to stop it before it destroys your business." Brett's phone rang. He answered with his professional voice. "Bradley Investigations." I watched his expression change as he listened. After a moment, he put the call on speaker. "Mr. Bradley, this is Patricia Vance, Cambria Rourde's attorney. I'm calling to inform you that your client has been harassing my client's employer and making false accusations that could constitute defamation." "Ms. Vance," Brett replied calmly, "my client hasn't contacted your client or her employer since the court hearing 3 days ago. We have evidence to the contrary. Phone records showing calls to Pinnacle Solutions, witnesses who can testify to threatening behavior." I shook my head vigorously. Brett held up a hand to keep me quiet. "I'd be very interested to see that evidence," Brett said, "because I can account for my client's whereabouts for the past 72 hours, and none of it involved contacting Pinnacle Solutions." There was a pause on the other end. "Nevertheless, we're prepared to file additional motions if this harassment continues." "Ms. Vance, before you do that, you might want to ask your client about the false reports being made to state regulatory agencies regarding my client's business, because that's actual harassment, and it's documented." Another pause, longer this time. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do, and I think when we trace those calls, we're going to find some very interesting connections." The line went quiet for several seconds before Vance spoke again, her voice tighter than before. "We'll be in touch." She hung up without another word. Brett leaned back in his chair. Well, that was enlightening. "Think she knew about the calls to my clients?" "Hard to say, but her reaction suggests someone's been busy without keeping the lawyers informed." My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "Stop digging or things get worse." I showed it to Brett, who immediately screenshotted it and forwarded it to Officer Martinez. "That's our smoking gun," he said. "Whoever's sending these is getting sloppy." The rest of the afternoon was spent damage control. I called every client I'd worked with in the past 2 years, explaining the situation and assuring them that any calls claiming to be from regulatory agencies were fraudulent. Most were understanding, even supportive, but a few seemed nervous, and I could tell they were wondering if there might be some truth to the allegations. That evening, I was installing additional security cameras around my property when a black Tesla pulled into my driveway. Wilder. He got out of the car slowly, his hands visible, clearly trying to appear non-threatening, but there was something desperate in his posture that put me on edge. "Felix," he called out as he approached. "We need to talk." "Nothing to talk about. You made your position clear with the vandalism and the threatening texts." "That wasn't me." "Right. And I suppose the fake calls to state agencies weren't you either." His face flushed. "Look, this has gotten out of hand. People are going to get hurt if we don't find a solution." "People are already getting hurt. My clients are being harassed because of your games." "I can make that stop." I set down the camera I'd been mounting and gave him my full attention. "How?" "Transfer Cambria to our Boston office. End the relationship. Make sure the divorce goes smoothly with no more drama." "In exchange for what?" "You keep the affair quiet. No social media posts, no calls to my board of directors, no evidence shared with anyone outside your legal team." I pretended to consider it. "And the harassment of my client stops immediately?" "Immediately." "What about the restraining order attempt, the fake regulatory complaints?" Wilder shifted uncomfortably. "Cambria was emotional. She thought you were trying to destroy her career." "I was responding to her trying to destroy my reputation." "I understand that now, But we can end this before anyone else gets hurt. I studied his face in the fading daylight. He looked exhausted, like a man who'd been fighting a losing battle for days. I need guarantees, I said finally. Written agreements, signed documents. This isn't a handshake deal. Whatever you need. And if any of my clients receive another fake call, if there's any more vandalism or harassment, the deal's off and everything goes public. Agreed. We shook hands in my driveway as the security cameras recorded everything. Wilder drove away looking relieved, probably thinking he'd managed to salvage the situation. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd admitted that Cambria was behind the harassment campaign. I called Brett as soon as Wilder's car disappeared. Got it all on camera, I said, including his admission that Cambria was making the fake regulatory calls. Beautiful. That gives us leverage in the divorce proceedings and potential criminal charges if we want to pursue them. Think they'll actually honor the agreement? For a while, maybe. But people like that don't change. They'll try something else eventually. Then we better be ready. The next morning brought an email from Patricia Vance requesting a meeting to discuss settlement terms. The tone was significantly more conciliatory than her previous communications. Jim Morrison and I met with them at a neutral conference room downtown. Cambria looked tired and defeated, a far cry from the confident woman who'd tried to humiliate me at brunch just a week ago. My client is prepared to be reasonable, Vance began. She's willing to accept a 50-50 split of assets and waive any claim to spousal support. It was a much better offer than I'd expected, especially given Maine's divorce laws. In exchange for what? Jim asked. Discretion regarding the circumstances of the marriage's end. No public statements, no social media posts, no sharing of private communications. Jim and I exchanged glances. It was essentially the same deal Wilder had proposed, but with legal language and Cambria's signature. We'll need some modifications, Jim said, including guarantees about future harassment and clear consequences for any violations. The negotiations took 3 hours, but we eventually reached an agreement that protected both my reputation and my financial interests. Cambria would get half the house value but none of my business assets. No spousal support, no ongoing financial obligations. Most importantly, she agreed to public silence about our marriage and divorce. As we signed the final documents, Cambria looked across the table at me. I never meant for it to go this far, she said quietly. Yes, you did, I replied. You just didn't expect me to fight back. Outside the conference room, Jim shook my hand. That's about as good an outcome as you could have hoped for, he said, especially given how this started. What about the criminal harassment charges, the fake regulatory calls? Up to you. We have enough evidence to pursue it, but it might be better to let sleeping dogs lie. I thought about it as I drove home through Millbrook's familiar streets. Cambria and Wilder had learned their lesson. My reputation was intact, my business was protected, and my marriage was finally over. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply winning. That evening, I met Brett at the Sable Fox for what had become our regular debriefing session. Barb had already heard about the settlement through her network of sources and had opinions about the outcome. Should have taken them for everything they had, she said, refilling our drinks. After what they put you through. I got what I needed, I replied. My reputation, my business, and my freedom. Plus, Brett added, sometimes it's better to win clean than to win dirty. Felix took the high road and still came out ahead. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment I tensed, thinking Wilder was breaking our agreement already. But this message was different. Heard about your situation. If you ever want to grab coffee and talk about starting over, call me. Sarah from the hardware store. I showed the message to Brett, who grinned. Looks like your reputation's better than you thought. Maybe. But I think I'll take some time to figure out who I am without Cambria first. Smart man. We finished our drinks and headed home through the quiet streets of Millbrook. The town looked the same as it had a week ago, but everything felt different now. I was different. For 15 years, I'd been half of a couple, defined by my relationship with Cambria. Now I was just Felix Rourde, contractor, problem solver, and apparently someone who didn't back down from a fight. It felt good. The house was quiet when I got home, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like mine. I poured myself a glass of the good whiskey I'd been saving for a special occasion and sat in my kitchen, looking at the space I'd built with my own hands. Tomorrow, I'd start planning renovations. Maybe tear down the wall between the kitchen and dining room, open up the space, install those custom cabinets I'd always wanted. For the first time in years, I was excited about the future. My phone buzzed one more time. Another unknown number, but this message made me smile. Felix, this is Tom Bradley. My wife and I were talking, and we'd like to hire you to renovate our master bathroom. When you're ready for new projects, give us a call. I set the phone aside and raised my glass in a silent toast. To new beginnings, honest work, and the satisfaction of a job well done. The loyalty test was over, and I'd passed with flying colors.